There is a stone face buried in the jungle of southern Mexico that is taller than a basketball hoop, heavier than a loaded school bus, and carved from a single block of volcanic rock with no metal tools, no wheels, and no animals to help drag it there. For 200 years, people looked at that face and told themselves a story that had almost nothing to do with the truth. And now, when decades of scattered data on these stone giants finally got pulled together and run through modern computational analysis, the picture that came back was so clear, so consistent, and so quietly devastating to the old myths that even researchers who had spent their careers on this subject were stunned by how obvious the real answer had been the whole time. This is the story of the Olmec colossal heads, and why getting them down for so long says less about ancient Mexico and more about USA. Let's start with what these things actually are, because most people have seen a photo of one without ever grasping the skull. 17 of these heads have been discovered so far, scattered across 4 sites along Mexico's Gulf Coast. The smallest stands about 6 feet tall. The largest is over 11 feet and is estimated to weigh close to 50 tons. Every single one was carved from one solid piece of basalt, a hard, dense volcanic stone, with no seams, no joints, no smaller pieces glued or fitted together. One stone. One head. And every one of those stones was quarried from the same source, the Tuxtla Mountains, a volcanic range that sits dozens of miles inland from where most of the heads eventually ended up. That distance is the first part of the puzzle, and it is a brutal one. We are talking about dragging blocks of stone weighing as much as a fully loaded truck across dozens of miles of tropical lowland, through river crossings, seasonal floodplains, and swamp that can swallow a person to the knee. And they did it without the wheel. They did it without horses, oxen, mules, or any beast of burden, because none of those animals existed anywhere in the Americas at that point in history. They did it without a single piece of iron or bronze. Every cut, every curve, every wrinkle and nailed and lip was shaped using harder stones as tools, along with an enormous amount of patience and human labor. The people who did this were the Olmec, and if that name is unfamiliar to you, it should not be, because almost everything that came after them in ancient Mexico grew out of what they built first. The Olmec emerged around 1500 BC along the Gulf Coast, in a hot, humid landscape crossed by slow rivers and fed by rich floodplain soil. We don't actually know what they called themselves. The word Olmec comes from a much later indigenous language and was applied to them long after their original cities had already been swallowed by forest. Their first major center was a site called San Lorenzo, which rose to prominence around 1200 BC. Later came La Venta, home to an enormous earthen pyramid and elaborate ceremonial offerings buried in careful, symbolic layers. After that came Tres Zapotes, which carried the culture forward even as the earlier centers faded. These were not scattered farming villages. They were planned cities with drainage systems, ceremonial plazas, and monumental architecture, run by a society organized enough to plan, feed, and direct large-scale public works. Around 400 BC, for reasons that are still debated among researchers, that society went into decline. Shifting river courses, environmental pressure, and internal political change may all have played a role, and it's likely some combination of causes rather than one single event. The great centers were abandoned. The jungle reclaimed the plazas. The colossal heads stayed exactly where they had been left, slowly sinking into the soil over the centuries, watching empires rise and fall above them. When the Aztecs came to power more than 1,000 years later, they occasionally stumbled on Olmec ruins and treated the leftover carvings and had the objects as relics of an older, mysterious past. But even the Aztecs didn't know who had actually built these things. The Olmec were already a legend by the time anyone wrote a word about them. Here is the part that tends to get skipped in the popular version of this story. The Olmec didn't just disappear into obscurity. They became the root system for nearly every major civilization that came after them in Mesoamerica. The calendar systems later refined by the Maya traced their foundations back to Olmec innovations. The complex religious cosmology later inherited by the Aztecs, full of recurring gods, sacred symbolism, and cyclical time, as the roots in Olmec belief. Motifs that first show up in Olmec art, like the stylized werjaguar and early rain and maize deities, kept resurfacing in the art of cultures that rose 1,000 years later, cultures whose people had no idea where those images originally came from. It's the visual equivalent of inheriting a language's grammar without ever learning who invented it. And Tenteres writing. In the early 2000s, archaeologists working near the Olmec Heartland uncovered a stone slab now known as the Cascajal block, dated to roughly 900 BC and covered in rows of small, repeating symbols and in pattern sequences. Most specialists who have studied it believe it represents a genuine early writing system, which would make it the oldest known writing anywhere in the Americas. If that holds up, it means the Olmec invented writing completely on their own, independently. The same way a small handful of other cultures across the entire span of human history managed to do, ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient China. No contact. No outside influence. Just people working out, on their own, how to fix language onto stone. So this was not a minor or peripheral culture. This was the foundational civilization of an entire hemisphere. And the objects that eventually made them famous around the world, the 17 colossal heads, are also the objects that got their story twisted almost beyond recognition, starting the very first time a modern ice fell on one of them. That moment happened in 1862, and it happened almost by accident. A farm worker clearing land near the town of Tres Zapotes in the Mexican state of Veracruz hit something solid buried in the earth. He assumed it was the bottom of some enormous overturned pot. He kept digging, and what emerged instead was a face, a colossal human face carved from stone, eyes heavily dead, lips full, wrapped in a helmet-like headdress. It was the first Olmec head to reach the awareness of the wider world. An antiquarian named José María Melgar y Serrano came to examine it, and when he looked at that ancient stone face, he didn't actually see what was in front of him. He saw what his own assumptions had already prepared him to see. He described the features as Ethiopian, meaning African, and concluded that indigenous Mesoamericans could not possibly have created something this sophisticated on their own. It's worth sitting with that clam for a second, because there isn't in vain it is the whole point of this story. Melgar had no evidence of any transatlantic contact. No artifacts pointing across the ocean, no linguistic trail, nothing. What he had was a deeply ingrained colonial assumption that indigenous peoples of the Americas were incapable of producing monumental art at this level of sophistication without outside help. That assumption didn't come from the stone. It came from him, and it got projected onto the stone as if it had been carved there. A claim like that don't need evidence to survive. It just needs to be useful to someone. And this one turned out to be extremely durable. It slipped out of academic circles and into popular books, fringe theories, and speculative documentaries, and it kept circulating for well over a century, long after professional archaeology had already begun dismantling it piece by piece. The real pushback started in the 1930s, when American archaeological teams began systematically excavating Olmec sites for the first time, treating the culture as a real, complex civilization worth understanding on its own terms rather than a mystery to be explained away by imagining outsiders. These excavations uncovered more colossal heads, along with altars, thrones, jade carvings, and no architectural evidence to start building an actual chronology. And the dates that came back were startling in their own right. This culture wasn't late. It wasn't a regional variation of something older. It was early, sitting at the very base of Mesoamerican civilization, older than the Maya, older than almost anything else in the historical record for that part of the world. And in decades of this kind of careful, evidence-based digging, not one professional excavation ever turned up anything supporting an African origin for these carvings. Not because researchers refused to look. They looked. It simply was not there. What they found instead was a civilization that explained itself completely on its own terms, without needing visitors from anywhere else. Look closely at what those excavations actually revealed about the heads themselves, and the old mystery falls apart pretty quickly. Each head is unmistakably an individual. Line up photographs of several of them, and you will not confuse one for another. The set of the brow changes. The width of the nose changes. The particular curve of the mouth, the angle of the jaw, even small natural asymmetries between the left and right side of a face, the kind of irregularity a real living face as but a decorative symbol never would. These are not stylized icons repeated on a template. They are portraits. And once you accept that they are portraits, the whole question flips. It stops being why ts faces look unusual and becomes who were ts specific, important people. Important know that their society moved a literal mountain to carve their likeness in stone. The leading interpretation among archaeologists is that these heads depict Olmec rulers, powerful individuals who held authority over cities like San Lorenzo and La Venta, over the surrounding farmland, trade routes, and labor of thousands of people. Distinct, individualized features aren't evidence of a foreign origin. They are evidence of the opposite, real, specific, indigenous people, rendered carefully enough that their individuality survives 3,000 years later. This is where more recent, more rigorous methods have added weight to what the archaeology already suggested. Human facial variation doesn't sort neatly into the tidy racial categories that 19th century European scholars like to use. It's continuous. Broad noses and full lips occur naturally and commonly across indigenous American populations, and always have. There is nothing about the facial features on these heads that points anywhere except to the people who actually lived on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, descendants of populations that had migrated into the Americas from Asia by way of the Bering Land Bridge, tens of thousands of years earlier. Genetic research into indigenous American populations, built on both ancient and modern DNA, has mapped that ancestry with a level of clarity 19th century population never had access to. And across that body of genetic evidence, there is no African genetic signatures showing up in pre-Columbian indigenous American populations. If there had been stand contact and intermixing during the Olmec period, it would have left a trace in the DNA. It hasn't, because it didn't happen. There is another line of evidence worth understanding, because it comes from chemistry rather than genetics. And it's a clever one. Strontium is an element that enters the human body through food and water, and its isotope ratios vary depending on local geology. That signature gets locked into human teeth as they form during childhood, essentially recording where a person grew up, a record that stays in the enamel for the rest of that person's life and long after. When researchers analyzed the strontium isotopes from skeletal remains found at Olmec sites, the results pointed to people who were locally born and locally raised, drinking the water and eating the food grown in that exact landscape. Not travelers. Not recent arrivals from anywhere far away. Sons and daughters of the Gulf Coast, precisely where you'd expect the builders of this civilization to have come from. Stack all of that together and you get four separate, unrelated lines of evidence, the artistic style of the carvings, which fits comfortably within the range of indigenous Mesoamerican features, the archaeological chronology, which places the Olmec earlier than anyone imagined and fairly rooted in the region, the isotope chemistry, which says these individuals grew up locally, and the population genetics, which shows no African ancestry anywhere in the pre-Columbian indigenous American gene pool. Four completely different disciplines, using completely different tools and methods, all converging on the exact same conclusion. That kind of agreement across independent fields is about as close as archaeology gets to certainty. And yet the African origin idea didn't just quietly disappear on the mainstream archaeology moved on. It went dormant for a while, and then resurfaced in the 1970s wearing a very different set of motivations. A researcher published a widely read book arguing that Africans had lived and influenced the Americas long before Columbus, using the Olmec heads as the centerpiece of that argument. This theme, the claim wasn't rooted in colonial contempt. It was embraced by some people as an act of reclamation, a counter-narrative pushing back against centuries of history that had erased and minimized African achievement. That motivation came from a real and understandable place. But being understandable doesn't make a historical claim accurate, and when scholars went back and carefully checked the sources, citations, and evidence behind that argument, it did not hold up. Much of it relied on selective quotation, passages pulled out of context, and conclusions that the underlying archaeological and genetic evidence simply did not support. The facts were once again being read through the same flawed, outdated racial categories, and the physical evidence for any transatlantic contact still wasn't there. And this is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable, because it exposes something worth sitting with. The colonial antiquarian in 1862 couldn't accept that indigenous Mexicans had built something this sophisticated on their own, so he handed the credit to Africa. A century later, an argument built from the opposite motivation, one meant to celebrate African history rather than diminish indigenous history, ended up making the exact same underlying move. It also could not let the achievement rest with the people who actually built it. It also ripped across an ocean to explain away a level of skill and organization that didn't need explaining away in the first place. Two arguments, born from completely opposite intentions, one from contempt and one from a desire for recognition, and both are that the identical structural error, the assumption that the people who lived on that land could not have built what stands on that land. That's the pattern that stands out clearly once you look at the full historical arc rather than any single chapter of it. Whether the motive was to dismiss indigenous accomplishment or to reclaim overlooked history for someone else, the actual effect on the Olmec was the same. It took the achievement out of their hands. It erased them at the exact moment people were supposedly paying attention to them. So let's strip all of that away and look at what actually deserves our attention here, because the real story is more impressive than either myth ever was. Picture the logistics involved in getting one of these blocks from the quarry to a ceremonial center. Tens of miles of tropical forest, river crossings, seasonal swampland that turns from firm ground in the dry season to nearly impassable mud in the wet season. No wheels. No draft animals. No metal tools. The best reconstruction we have involves moving these blocks partly by river on rafts wherever water allowed, and no overland the rest of the way using wooden rollers, ropes, and sheer coordinated human labor. Hundreds of people working together to drag a 50-ton stone forward, inch by inch, day after day, for dozens of miles. That is not just a transportation problem. That's a portrait of an extraordinarily well-organized society, one capable of mobilizing, feeding, and coordinating enough labor to accomplish something that would still be a serious engineering challenge today, using nothing but rope, timber, and human muscle. And every independent test of who these people actually were keeps landing in the same place. Wooden card bust recovered from a waterlogged Olmec ritual site, preserved for millennia by the oxygen-free conditions of the bag, show faces that fall squarely within the natural range of indigenous Mesoamerican features. Isotope evidence says local. Genetic evidence across the hemisphere says descended from Asian origin Papielasians who crossed into the Americas, via the Bering Land Bridge, with no African genetic signature anywhere in the pre-Columbian record. Every method, every discipline, every needle points the same direction. The broad noses and full lips on these carvings look the way they do because that is what human faces actually look like, in that population, and because these are stylized sculptures shaped by Olmec artistic convention, not photographs, but a culture sound deliberate choice about how to memorialize its powerful dead. They were rulers. That is the conclusion the evidence keeps returning, patiently, across a century of research, to anyone willing to look at it honestly instead of through the lens of what they wanted to find. 17 specific human beings, each one significant enough that an entire society was willing to move a literal mountain of stone to preserve their likeness. Each face distinct because each one was a real, individual person who held real authority on the Gulf Coast of Mexico 3,000 years ago. We don't know their names. The script that might have recorded them, if it ever did, hasn't been fully deciphered. But we don't know this, they weren't visitors. They were the founders, the earliest great civilization of Mesoamerica, the cultural root from which the calendar systems, religious cosmology, and writing traditions of nearly everything that followed eventually grew. So here's what's genuinely worth thinking about after all of this. For close to 2 centuries, people looked at one of the most sophisticated cultures of the ancient world and could not quite let it on its own achievement. First out of contempt, later out of a well-meaning but misplaced desire for reclamation, but in both cases, reaching outward instead of simply accepting what the evidence had been saying all along. The hells were never really the mystery. The mystery, the real one, is how a civilization with no metal, no will, and no animal labor organized itself well enough to plant the seeds of an entire hemisphere's worth of culture, art, mathematics, and writing. That mystery deserves to finally be treated as the extraordinary human achievement it actually is. If this kind of depth dive into forgotten and misunderstood ancient civilizations is something you want more of, let me know in the comments which culture you'd like to see cover next, and consider subscribing so you don't miss it.